Well, welcome everyone. It's really good to see you for another episode of the Rule of St Benedict. And this week we were looking at chapters 21 through to 30. It's interesting that St Benedict's rule is seen as one of the gentlest rules that were ever written, and yet here we go. We have eight straight chapters, all on punishment and the kind of, what you do and who it's for, which is rather remarkable. And it'll be interesting for you later to have a little think about what you made of these chapters on punishment, I guess, for misdemeanors. Anyway, this is going to be the focus of our section of our evening. Times have obviously changed, thankfully. Lots of things have changed, but it seems that what is underlying his idea of punishment, why he has it, and also what form the actual punishment is, lies in this kind of deep understanding of the human nature and also a real compassionate and honest approach to how we as individuals can get it wrong, how we can sort of deceive ourselves, and how actually we need others outside to really help us think about what we're doing, why we're doing, but also those times when we really do need to change. Or unless, if we don't, then we won't actually be able to grow. But I think what's really important about Benedict's, this whole understanding of Benedict's, I suppose, self-awareness and then the repercussions of it, is that it's all comes out of the act of love from the community. So we can kid ourselves about who we really are, but in Benedict's community, there's no room for this kind of dishonesty on the path of holiness. The community is honest with us, and we have to be honest with ourselves. And it'll be interesting when you go into breakout rooms just to think about, maybe the form that Benedict is talking about. You may want to do something completely different, but actually the ethos that lies behind it, that need for recognition of our own, when we let ourselves down, but when we're actually, really hurting those around us, and how we deal with it, but also how a community deals with it rather than running away from it, which I think is often what we do. There are a few themes that really lie behind and within Benedict's approach, and that's what we're going to just have a think about in this early introduction. And of course, you might want to take later into your questioning and thoughts. So the first thing is that Benedict does not severely punish everything. He's very, he's very forgiving of a lot of misdemeanors. He doesn't punish, for example, incompetence or lack of spiritual intensity or ignorance or weakness of the flesh. He's not about us all being perfectionist, holy in that sense, that we don't have, our ability still to err. That's not what this section is about, but rather it's all about an honest recognition that we do get things wrong. And there's that lovely bit that we were looking at in the whole liturgy section, if you remember, when he gives that that alternative to the sort of vigils, office of vigils, saying, if you oversleep and you're all a bit late for the vigils, then this is the shortened version for you. So he's actually quite understanding of human nature, and that, sometimes actually those 5 minutes of bed. Oh, well, we all know what that feels like, don't we? But instead, what he does do is right at the beginning of these chapters on punishment is he absolutely names and punishes those things which really undermine and can destroy the community. That's what he is really focusing on here. And that's, I guess, what we need to keep in mind. What is really getting him, upset, he goes right to the heart of it. What is it that really destroys communities? And I guess we all know, really, he doesn't need us to tell him to tell us, because it's actually grumbling, that kind of grumbling and backbiting. And for Benedict, it is the community that enables us to both live the Christian life and learn from it. So human growth, Benedict understands, is a real gradual process, but there's one thing that can really kill and destroy that and infect it, is the rot of grumbling. Those people who don't honor the community, and particularly don't honor the authority of the community. And we've seen right at the beginning of this section how what Benedict does is he doesn't hold the authority in one person. He actually devolves the authority to different people. So it's not like, the leader. There are many people who are actually leading the community in collaboration and together. So when he talks about, this idea of grumbling destroying and not honoring authority, it's the whole sense of authority of the community. It's not just having a snipe at the person in charge. It's about that you're just not respecting what we hold dear. It's those people who seek to snarl up then the development of the community in the worst possible way by their kind of consistent complaining, nothing's right, another letter in, I want it to be like this, a constant resistance, anything you do is wrong, and then also outright rebellion and backbiting. This, for Benedict, Benedict states, just has to be corrected, and it has to be corrected in quite a harsh way, and also has to be done quickly, and often in quite a radical way. So that's what he hones in on, and I think that's important to keep in our minds as we read this through, because in a sense, if you think of that, then it holds all these chapters together quite beautifully. The other thing is that the second thing is that Benedict doesn't have a nice discussion with us about this. He doesn't try to reason with us about these disordered parts of our lives. He literally just names it and says, stop it. Stops the action or behavior before it takes root in us, to absolutely nip something in the bud. And I think that's actually quite important if you think about our modern world, because often, particularly in Christian communities, I think we have this notion of tolerance, and tolerance is not a good thing, but often we can extend tolerance to really bad behavior that actually is undermining. And we think, oh no, we can keep everyone in the community, it'll all be fine. But actually, we're not very good as Christian communities just saying, look, that's not what we sign up to here. In the Christian life, we don't sign up to this. And naming it. We're quite averse to conflict, I suppose. And we've sort of got that embedded into our psyche, whereas Benedict is really straightforward. No, you've got to name it and you've got to stop it now. And I think that can be seen as quite helpful, actually. So how Benedict does this says a lot about his understanding of human nature and how, in fact, we do grow on the path to holiness. It's growth that's going to take time. It's growth that comes out of lots of falling and rising and falling and rising and falling and rising and all those sort of things. But what's really crucial is that Benedict believes in the sanctity of the community, that even if we get it wrong, there are others who are going to be around us who will help us. And we need to also be there for them when they get it wrong, that somehow our relationship with each other is utterly integral. And it's another example, I think, of Benedict saying, you know, I guess Donne said this, he said, no man is an island, but he's really living this out and saying, you know, you really can't grow in the path of holiness if you're taking an individual route. You can only do this in community with other people. And that's so countercultural to our times, because we're so individualistic and I want what I want and I'll do what I'll do and I'll create a community of myself. That basically Benedict is saying, well, you just got that wrong. You're disillusioned. The only way you can really grow in holiness is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And this is the way that he shows us how to do it. Now, there are lots of rules at the time, and we spoke about them a couple of weeks ago. And we know that he was influenced a lot by the Rule of the Master and took a lot of his ideas from there. But if you go back to those rules and you look at what they say about punishment, you really do start to get an idea of how Benedict is a rule of his time, but how radically different it is, and also how much kinder it is. So, for example, if we just take two of those rules and look at how they do punishment, it's really quite frightening, actually. So one of them is the Penitential of Columbanus. This was written in the late 6th and the early 7th century. Here, punishment was always very personal. It was personal and it was penitential in nature. So, for example, if you had done something wrong, you could be told you were going to have to fast. And fasting was specific to what kind of fault you had committed. So it could be lengthened, it could be made into just bread and water, or could be absolutely no meals at all. It could be as short as a few days to absolutely a month. So horrendous. And the ones I find really quite difficult to think about is actually making prayer into a punishment. So in this rule, if you had done something particularly wrong, then you could be asked to recite psalms or prayers, and particularly a whole load of psalms and prayers. Now, I think later on in the medieval period, they use this kind of giving of saying the Lord's Prayer, saying your rosary, in a sense of restoration, not as punishment. It's a sense of, going back to your prayer life, going back, rediscovering God. Whereas I think in this penitential, it is literally, you're going to have to do this because it's not nice. And I find that quite difficult. Yeah, I'm sure you would as well. And also you can combine that with fasting. The other thing is that the penitential of Columbanus has a lot of physical correction. So you have beatings, physical chastisement, and particularly they were given for the sin of disobedience. And finally, the ultimate one was exile or separation. So you lost your status, you lost your office, and you were temporarily excluded. And that's slightly different from the way Benedict does it, because Benedict does it in a kind of, first of all, you don't get to fulfill all the offices, you sit on your own. Then you have another period of thinking, and actually the very, very last thing you do, if you really aren't going to recognize the community, or if you really aren't going to recognize how you're undermining the community, then I'm afraid you have to leave. That's not the same here. This is about pushing you out, sort of like a scapegoat. So I find that quite harsh and quite difficult to look at. And when you go back to Benedict, it's a bit sort of, actually, this is not quite what we imagined for our times, but it's not as bad as that one was. The other, of course, is the Rule of the Master, which was early 6th century. And of course, this is the one that Benedict draws so much from. And here's that in that Rule of the Master, it's really clear that punishment is all about communal, it's hierarchy, and it's coercive, with an enormous emphasis on obedience, fear, and public disciplining. So what's central once again is corporal punishment with beating, with rods, or with physical restraint. And there was a whole system of which moved from a public rebuke, from a private warning to a public rebuke to physical punishment and then exclusion. Now, I guess you could say that Benedict has a similar sort of escalation, but I'm not sure it's quite that bad. And one of the things about the Rule of the Master is his notion of public humiliation, with actual public confession of faults before the entire community, eating separately or apart, and we see that in Benedict, but also an important aspect of shaming before the whole community. The other way of punishment was restricted living conditions, so impose silence, impose isolation, reduce rations. And all of this, the intention of this was to break willfulness and restore obedience. So in a sense, it has a similar kind of, self-reflective understanding, but it does seem quite harsh. Seems quite harsh to me. So next to these, Benedict's punishments do seem milder and focused on much more on the nature of the sin. It's not such an arbitrary system of punishment. It's very clear, and what it is so focused on is once again very clear. basically, for Benedict, if we refuse to learn from the community and cooperate it, then in a sense, what right do we have to be treated as part of that community and to all its support? And therefore, to understand how important the community is, it being involved in it needs to just be suspended for a while. So once we've separated ourselves from the community by withdrawing our hearts, by literally going through the motions, but actually we're not committed to the life, we've, kind of died inside or rebelled against the community, then it's actually up to the community to actually withdraw from the person in order to enable the heart to be once again sort of softened and understood what is important for them. But this is not a system of trying to crush a person, but to enable them to get life in perspective and to humbly start over again, to learn, to grow. And we all know that growing can be painful. Any members of the community, so anyone who wants to try and help, and there's a whole chapter on this, anyone else around them, are not there to prevent this by interfering, which is what that little chapter's all about. But it's actually the people who are there to really help grow are the leaders and the wise members of the community who are there as shepherds and physicians to help in that process of metanoia and return. So Benedict, unlike the other rules, I think it's very clear that actually we isolate ourselves from the community, and the community will do everything possible to bring us back and help us recognize that actually we've cut ourselves off and that we need help. Finally, however mild Benedict's method of correction may be in comparison with the standards of the day, Benedict does require atonement. He does require an understanding of what we've done. The rule expects, actually, then no less of us today. So things that are broken, they need to be mended. Things that, if they've been running away with us, must be curbed. Things that are awry in us, they must be set straight. If there's been a breakdown between, brothers or sisters, it must be amended and words spoken to correct it. So he's got nothing to do with running away. He's very honest and actually is saying that, atonement, metanoia, repentance, growth, it's not done by accident, as if something will happen, that we actually have to intentionally mend something. But that's not to say, and we all know this, it's true, isn't it not, that, when something goes wrong, that the gift of being able to ask forgiveness and have forgiveness being received actually strengthens the bonds within a community. When we can be really honest with each other, that kind of, loving, building up sort of way, it actually makes the community stronger. And I guess that's really one of Benedict's insights, is don't run away from the reality of human nature, but go into the heart of human nature and find Christ's resurrection within it that will draw us all closer to him and closer to one another. And of course, that just so rings true with Benedict and his love of scripture. So you wouldn't be surprised, actually, that the way he deals with people and where it deals with this, for us, a difficult subject, is absolutely rooted in scripture. So basically what Benedict is requiring from all the members of the community is self-control, self-knowledge, and of course what we've already been looking at, the tools for good works, and ultimately humility. So it's like he's taking the first part of his rule and saying, okay, that's all really lovely, isn't it? You know, but what's it going to look like in a fractured, you know, human community where, oh, it's, you know, we get things wrong every day. How is that going to work here? And he shows us this is how you're going to have to deal with it. Okay, there's no running away. I guess, you know, that if we were going to try and sum this up, it requires what we would see as very old-fashioned, as come to have many negative connotations about it, but it's that little word discipline, disciplining ourselves, being honest, and continuing to kind of have that sort of self-control that's not punitive, but it's actually about being honest and real with ourselves and within each other. For Benedict, if you want to grow in the path of holiness, then you've really got to grasp this, because that's the bit that we can so quickly run away from and deny. So I don't underestimate that these chapters are not an easy read, but I think lying behind them, there's some really, really good wisdom that can really help us in our relationships. And if we stop for a moment and actually applied it not just to our communities, the people we know, but we escalate it to the international community. Well, I'll leave it there for you to just ponder. What would it look like if we were able to be honest with international leaders, with one another?